Okay.
I think we might as well get started. What do you think?
What? Why?
I think we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Cam Gordon, and I'm chairing the meeting today. This is the meeting of the Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee, and I'm joined by all committee members, Council members Fry, Bender, Johnson, Glidden, and Cano. We have 7 items on our agenda today. 4 of them are consent items, and 3 of them are discussion items, and I expect us to take some time discussing those items, especially item 5. We're going to make sure that we get into that enough. But first I will read through the consent items, and if any of the committee members want to pull anything off for discussion, we can certainly do that. The first item is setting a public hearing for March 17th, 2014, to consider the reappointment of the Health Commissioner, Gretchen Musicant. The second item is to authorize a cooperative agreement with the Metropolitan Airports Commission and the counties of Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Hennepin, Ramsey, Scott, Washington, and the city of Bloomington, authorizing a regional distribution node on MAC property of federal stockpiles of medical materials in the event of a public health emergency. And those stockpiles will be there, and then professionals will bring them and deliver them throughout the several counties in the city. We don't have to go pick up our own. And 3 is to authorize an increase to the not-to-exceed amounts for the following selected master contracts. These are master contracts for our Minnesota Visiting Nurse Agency, Neighborhood Health Source, and the Family Partnership. This item will be also referred to Ways and Means. And the 4th item has to do with the site agreement with the Minnesota Campus Compact for Vista Volunteer, authorizing execution of the agreement for the 2014-15 time period so that they can be a host site for a College Health Corps, AmeriCorps Vista Volunteer to work on youth violence prevention programming. Those are the 4 items that I'll move forward on consent. Anyone need to pull anything off for comment or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Those motions carry. So now we'll move on to our discussion items. And the first item is the receiving our Energy Pathways Study. And we'll get a report here. And I believe our city coordinator, Paul Austin, can kick this off. Welcome, Mr. Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I'm the very short setup for CE and Mike Bull and his crew. Just as a background and a reminder, our 20-year franchise agreements with Xcel and CenterPoint Energy expire at the end of 2014. So that creates an opportunity for us to have a conversation about those agreements and how they act and interact with the city's energy goals. The City Council approved the Climate Action Plan in June of 2013 that outlined how the city would reach 15% carbon reduction goals by 2015 and 30% by 2025. The interaction of energy and climate is clearly important and clearly a big piece of this conversation. The other piece of background, remember, is that the natural gas and electrical use in buildings within this city account for about 66% of the city's carbon footprint, which has been the focus of the work that our folks and folks in the city have been doing on the building inventory and the building energy work. You have to remember that when we're thinking about energy, there's 3 big prongs that we're staring at and trying to balance out at the same time. Reliability, which tends to end up with a focused conversation on infrastructure and maintenance and the efficiency and just how well our system is using, both on the generation and distribution side. You have the expense or cost of power. That is something that is clearly important to people who pay the rates. It's also important when you start talking about the structures and regulatory systems that are in place to manage how those costs are allocated across service areas and the like. And the last is how clean the power is. And clean and cost intersect and overlap when you start talking about immediate costs to the user versus long-term costs to the user and or the planet in a broader context, and the alternatives that you have for electrical generation. So a piece of this conversation, and it'll be reflected in the comments from Mr. Bull and his compatriots, is this triangle between reliability, cost, and the greenness or cleanness of the power that we're talking about. In terms of the pathways itself, the study in June 2013, there was an RFP for a process in which we entered into agreement with CEE to conduct this study. In September of 2013, there was a report back to the RE&E committee on the stakeholder process or on the vision statements that the city has made about energy over time. In November of 2013, there was an update to RE&E on some of the preliminary work on these pathways and potential legislative recommendations. There's an internal staff team made up of the city coordinator's office, the sustainability office, the city attorney's office, finance, communications, public works, and some other departments as needed at the time. And that we have a report back on franchise negotiations that's due back into the council on June 30th of 2014. That's a resolution that's already passed. And then just a quick preview of the RCA. Under the recommendations, essentially we're recommending that the committee receive and file this pathway study, that there's direction to staff to pursue the recommendations for clean energy agreements and all necessary franchise agreements consistent with the pathway's recommendations through the ongoing negotiations that are already occurring, and to direct staff to recommend changes to the city's 2014 legislative agenda. Those are the primary recommendations, and I will turn it over to Mr. Bull and his compatriots to fill out the rest of the story, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bull, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We are very happy to be here. I know everybody says that, but this means we've come to the end of a wonderfully challenging project. It's taken 8 months of very hard work, but I think the recommendations that we're bringing to you from under the Energy Systems Pathway Study are both innovative and pragmatic, and will allow the city of Minneapolis to meet its energy sustainability goals in ways that will allow you to get started right away, that won't increase rates in the city, will increase renewable energy and energy efficiency projects and jobs in the city, will enhance the reliability and the equity of energy services, and will put the city at the forefront of a utility business model transformation discussion that's been going on around the country. The Energy System Pathway Study itself has three major components. I'll be talking to you about the energy vision and the pathways assessment, and Jennifer Edwards will come up and talk about the programs and strategies and then some of the next steps that we're recommending. But first I wanted to introduce the team. This is a wonderful group of people that I've had the privilege of managing on this project over these past 8 months. They collectively represent about 175 years of energy-related experience. I was going to say something about Sheldon here, but I'm going to knock it. CE provided the regulatory and technical horsepower for the project. As many of you know, CE started out as the Minneapolis Energy Office, founded by Sheldon Strom back in 1979, housed in this building. As Paul Lawson has said, we were MEO before MEO was cool. McGran Shea provided the legal work for the project. McGran Shea does a lot of work with and for the city, but is also the general counsel to the Minnesota Municipal Utilities Association. So these folks know more about municipal utilities in Minnesota than anyone else. Brian Ross from CR Planning, Brian's back there, headed up the development of the energy vision I'll be presenting to you. Brian is a longtime member of the city's Citizens Environmental Advisory Committee, and also was a utility consumer advocate for a number of years. And then finally, but not least, Ken Campbell did an incredible job putting together the financial assessment for forming a municipal electric utility for the city, and we could not have done this project without Ken. So, just to jump in, the context for today's discussion. First, the city has gained great momentum on energy issues. The advocates have done a tremendous job driving a citywide conversation on energy options in which the city utilities have engaged, the business community has engaged, neighborhood associations. This has been a terrific conversation that's happened around the city, as you all know. While all of that was going on, the city was completing its climate action plan, which is a tremendous accomplishment and is used as a foundational document for this report in many respects. Third, and this is kind of esoteric, we're talking inside baseball here, but this question of the utility business model, how utilities make money. The investor-owned utilities earn a rate of return on the capital they've invested in their system, and they recover their costs, including their return to shareholders, through the amount of electricity and natural gas they sell. That's the current utility business model, and that model is evolving to be more responsive to customer and community needs and to better align, we hope, with public policies and public goals. This discussion we're having here today and the discussion that's been going on in Minneapolis for more than a year now fits exactly into that broader context. Fourth, the upcoming session is going to be pretty quiet for energy issues after a difficult but productive 2013 session, and we worked very hard to take that into account in developing our recommendations. And finally, on this slide, we stress this each time we come before you, that regardless of which pathway you choose, the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission is where a lot of these issues will continue to be decided, and your voice at the commission will continue to be critical. The energy vision. So one of the things we were asked to do is to gather up, provide a comprehensive concept of where the city wants to go on energy issues. It was intended to be both foundational to the report, in the sense that it helps us evaluate the pathways and programs to determine whether or not they'll help us achieve the energy vision, but also aspirational. It'll bring Minnesota residents and businesses together around a common set of goals. So Brian worked with a few of us to inventory a number of energy-related policies, plans, resolutions issued by the city over the past several years. We interviewed key stakeholders from a variety of sectors, and then met with the Citizens Environmental Advisory Committee to get their input and to prioritize various components. And then we did present that to the previous City Council last September. This is the statement of energy vision boiled down to a single statement. In 2040, the Minneapolis' energy system will provide reliable, affordable, local, and clean energy services for Minneapolis homes, businesses, and institutions, sustaining the city's economy and environment, and contributing to a more socially just community. There are a number of components to that energy vision: reliable and equitable energy services, clean energy, increased use of local resources, market integration of efficiency, and a collaborative progress toward those outcomes that reflect the city's climate, economic development, and social equity goals. Jenny and her team used this energy vision and these components to develop metrics to evaluate the programs and strategies they analyzed, and she'll talk with you about that in a few moments. With the pathways itself, we realized early on that the status quo was not an option, that it would not allow the city to achieve its climate action plan goals or its energy vision. The status quo is essentially that the utilities and the city work independently of one another, except on a relatively ad hoc basis. The one instrument where they do come together to discuss energy issues is the franchise agreement, which deals by statute with a limited set of issues related to the use of public rights of way. And even then, that gets negotiated in the past once every 20 years or so. So to be able to reach its goals, the city needs more influence or control over energy services, either directly or through a more collaborative, cooperative relationship with the utilities that serve the city. So we developed 4 pathways, building on that takes us beyond the status quo. Pathway 1 is we refer to as the enhanced franchise agreement pathway. This is either a broader single franchise agreement that goes beyond use of public rights of way issues to address a whole host of issues, and that would take legislative authorization, or a franchise agreement that's focused on those traditional public rights-of-way issues with a separate agreement that deals with clean energy activities and programs, and properly structured that does not take legislative authorization. Pathway 2 are city utility partnerships, formal ongoing collaboration between the city and its utilities. We're not talking in this context about partnerships in any legal sense, but to emphasize that in order to be successful, both the city and the utilities will need to act as willing partners to meet shared goals. Pathway 3 was community choice aggregation, also referred to as municipal aggregation. It's a model that's been used in many states around the country that have deregulated their electric industries to allow customers to choose their electric suppliers apart from their incumbent local utility. CCA allows municipalities to choose electric suppliers on behalf of their residents and businesses, and leaving all other aspects of energy services to the incumbent utility: billing, customer service, the operation and maintenance of the distribution infrastructure, and the like. And then Pathway 4 was the formation of a municipal utility, otherwise known as municipalization. This slide gives you another way to look at these 4 pathways relative to the city's involvement in energy services. Pathway 1, the city does get involved on a broader set of issues and more often than currently, but still only as part of a bilateral agreement once every so many years. Pathway 2, city utility partnerships, again, are formal ongoing collaboration between the city and the utilities, and the city begins to have direct responsibility for planning and collaborating with the utilities on clean energy activities in the city. Pathway 3, community choice aggregation, the city takes over a major portion of energy services in the city by arranging for power supply, and Pathway 4, the city becomes the utility.
Could I just ask a
Sure.
clarifying question, maybe on that last slide?
Yep.
It seems to me that if your city utility partnership was crafted in a certain way, it could also allow the city to be participating a little more like in the community choice aggregation, where it was generating some of its own power. So in a sense, 2 and 3 could be merged a little bit, even if it isn't maybe the classic community choice aggregation you hear about in other states. Could you maybe just elaborate on that a little? Or you're nodding your heads, but
Yep, I am nodding.
and back there, another head is nodding. You only have one, but there was.
And Jenny will mention this in her talk. This was one, innovative energy supply arrangements is one of the programs we thought we could explore in the context of a partnership that would start moving down potentially that CCA framework.
Thank you.
So I wanted to talk a little
Councilmember
bit about.
Fry maybe has a question on that very point. Is it?
Thank you, Chair Gordon. With regard to pathway number 3, can you just elaborate slightly on that first bullet point, which is city takes over arranging for power supply? What exactly would they take over?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Fry, in that context, CCA, the current utility, in this case, it's always been electric utilities in the case of CCA. So it would be Excel in this case, would continue to operate and manage the infrastructure for delivery of services and all the stuff, the back office stuff that goes with that, the billing and customer service. What the city would do in that case is contract directly with entities who generate or arrange for power supply. It could be with Excel, but there are third-party providers that are available to who will buy and sell through into the mid-continent independent system operator markets in order to provide you with electricity.
So the city would have full control over the sourcing?
That's
Okay,
for
thank
source and supply mix, I think is the key there. That's correct. So I wanted to walk through some advantages and disadvantages with each of these pathways before I get to the recommendations. So an advantage of the enhanced franchise agreement pathway, it can be implemented in the near term. It does allow the city to address a broader set of issues, and the city continues to benefit from utility experience and expertise on a host of issues. However, there is no ongoing collaboration or coordination between the cities and the utilities under this pathway, and we think that's critical if progress is to be achieved and sustained. You have the utilities' attention currently, but they will only continue to pay attention for as long as you do. This is different. What's happening with the city and the utilities here is different from the normal course of business in the past, and the utilities will want to revert back to an earlier time where things were more simple. So as long as there's a mechanism for you to sustain your interest, they will sustain their attention. In addition, the city can't rely on the utilities just to continue to try to meet the city's goals. If the city's aggressive energy goals are to be met, the city needs to bring its regulatory and relationship assets to the table to be combined with the utility expertise and utility funding for clean energy projects. And this pathway doesn't really allow for that. The pathway number 2 does. Pathway number 2, city utility partnerships, allows the city to be engaged in the planning and coordination of clean energy activities in the city, bringing both the city and utility assets to bear on accelerating clean energy programs, implementation and uptake, and the city continues to benefit from the utility expertise and funding. However, if the partnership were to be a standalone entity, which was our initial preference as we were looking at this, that takes legislation, and I think that's a downside. But if we continue to look at it, we realize we can create the partnership through an agreement rather than through a legislative authorization, and you'll see that in our recommendations. CCA, as I've mentioned, it allows the city to take control over the energy supply mix. The city continues to benefit from utility experience and expertise with regard to the operation of the grid. The city doesn't have to take on the costs of acquiring and operating that energy delivery system. However, as I think I've also mentioned, that CCA is a creature of electricity deregulation, which Minnesota has never embraced. It'd take a significant amount of time and attention to work through whether and how community choice aggregation will fit into the Minnesota regulatory framework. Pathway 4 is municipalization. It does provide the city full control over energy services in the city. That's both an advantage and a disadvantage in the sense that it exposes the city to significantly more risk. Our assessment is also that it would increase the cost of utility service from anywhere from slightly more than Excel's rates in the most favorable scenario to significantly more than those rates in more likely scenarios. It introduces a significant amount of uncertainty and substantial delay in potential implementation due to regulatory and process questions.
Councilmember Cano has a question.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Chair, I was going to put this in a broader sense. Okay. So this graph gives you another way for us, the way that we're looking at these pathways. The vertical axis reflects the time and resources necessary to implement a pathway. The horizontal axis reflects the relative increase in city responsibility and control over energy services in the city. And as we look at the 4 pathways, the first 2, enhanced franchise agreements and city utility partnerships, allow the city some additional control or influence over energy services and can be implemented in a relatively shorter time frame. The other 2, community choice aggregation and formation of a municipal utility, would give the city significantly more control, but take substantially more time and resources to implement. And so that all factors into our recommendations. I'll just jump into that. We're recommending a dual strategy for the near term, which blends pathway numbers 1 and 2. First, to negotiate a franchise agreement or franchise agreements that are focused on public use of rights of way, broadened to include targeted related issues such as reliability reporting, utility infrastructure investment and planning, and the like, and then negotiate second agreements with the utilities, which we call clean energy agreements, in which the city agrees not to municipalize during the term of the agreement in exchange for commitments from the utilities in meeting city energy goals. This agreement would also create a city utility clean energy coordinating partnership to plan and prioritize clean energy activities in the city. This entity, this partnership, is potentially the beginning stages of a new utility business model, combining assets and functions of a municipality with those of an investor-owned utilities, and then dedicated those combined assets toward meeting public purposes and public goals. And perhaps most importantly, the structure is relatively easy for a city and a utility to establish. So it's easily replicated by other cities. A network of cities that have conducted climate action plans like yours, and then formed partnerships with their utilities in order to implement those plans. That's a potentially very powerful force for climate action around the region and around the country.
Councilmember Johnson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the municipalization slide, I did see it says increased cost, which is something that you mentioned. I was wondering if that increased cost is because of current legislative restrictions which require us to pay forward profit for several years of the utilities, and that if those legislative restrictions were not in place, would municipalization actually be a lower cost?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, I have a slide on that in the appendix, but I can touch on it. In the most favorable scenario that we worked on, we sort of backed out those, what you're referring to as sort of the lost revenues, the legislation that's pending before the legislature. We backed those out, and is one of we tried to create the most favorable scenario for the relative cost between city utility rates and Xcel Energy's rates. And I can show you that it comes very close. So if you look at this slide, that one column, it's a very small difference between Xcel rates and the utility rates. But that is the most favorable scenario. You would have to have changed the statute. You would also, members, this wouldn't be a clean energy scenario either, that this would be whatever is available on the system at the time, and which is most likely going to be a fossil fuel-based set of resources. But if you look at the other two columns, those are relatively more expensive rates than Xcel currently charges. But, Mr. Chair, if I can just add, this is all in the context of a one-year look. So the financial illustration is 1 year of costs and 1 year of rates. It doesn't necessarily take into account the trends of rates and costs in the market.
And just to confirm that I'm reading this right, on the low cost, it would be 1/5 of 1 cent difference for each kilowatt hour. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's a very small percentage. It's
great.
It's negligible in the sense of the specificity of the illustration.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm wondering, going back a little bit to the slide where we were a few minutes ago, but before I ask that question, sorry. So let's say we're going to dream a little bit for 3 seconds here. Let's say that the city of Minneapolis wants to, maybe by the year 2030, have 100% of its energy be renewable and clean energy. Which one of these models would you think would facilitate us achieving that goal by that timeline?
You know, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cano, I think you could look at 2, 3, or 4 for that scenario, for that outcome. Mm-hmm. The difficulty will be to the extent that you continue to rely solely on Xcel for their generation. They're on a tremendous pathway toward decarbonizing, but they're faced with a significant choice that I know that the chair is concerned about, as well as what to do with their nuclear assets in that 2030 timeframe that you referenced. Currently, if they were to replace those nuclear assets, it would be replaced by natural gas, most likely, which would increase their fossil fuel generation. That's part of that partnership scenario. Pathways 3 and 4 would give you full control over what energy mix you'd like to have in that time frame. It might be best in some sense overall for the climate, if for the city to work in partnership with Excel to continually to push for a more renewable, a more carbon-free resource base, because that would be spread out across Excel service territory, and those and not just for the city itself. And so you'd have a bigger impact on climate in that case.
And then going forward, one or two more slides with the community agreements.
Right.
One more time, I think. Maybe one or two more slides. I apologize. One more. Yes. Okay. Clean energy agreements. So you talk about city agrees not to municipalize during the term of the agreement. Is there a recommended length for that term, or is that up for, you're saying that's up for negotiation?
It could be up for negotiation. We got some sense from the city attorney's office that an agreement of this sort may only could be only under some other considerations effective for 5 years. The ability the concern that they raised was waiving a municipal power or agreeing not to use a municipal power shouldn't be a long-term thing, that you'd want to do that for short periods of time and then recommit if that's the case.
Thank you.
Probably with some good escape clauses too, if need be. Council Member Johnson has another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things I was looking for in terms of advantages, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. We frequently are asked to put on different hats here. I put on my Ward 12 hat. I put on my city hat. Put on my regional hat when I'm thinking about things like Southwest Light Rail. And with this topic of energy in our city, our current electrical infrastructure, our current electrical business model, it supports urban sprawl. And that comes at a huge, tremendous, enormous cost to our city, because we're enabling lifestyles that are further away from the city that, frankly, if the individual residents that are further outside the city had to actually pay the true cost of the infrastructure to live where they live, then they wouldn't be able to afford it. So then they would live closer to the city. The commutes would be shorter distances. We'd have less infrastructure build out. And frankly, our residents within this city are paying that burden. When Xcel Energy's Monticello plant overruns costs, we're paying for that in our utility rate increases. We're paying to build out that infrastructure, which takes people out of the city. And clearly one of our goals is to grow the city, is to make sure that we have more economic activity in our city, and to make sure that we're more sustainable. And frankly, living in dense urban environments is a more sustainable lifestyle than living out in, well, I don't want to offend any cities, so I don't need to name names, but I'm wondering if there's any way for us to address that under any of these paths in order to get away from that, and so our city is directly paying for its infrastructure and not contributing and subsidizing unsustainable lifestyles and urban sprawl.
Mr. Chair, Representative Councilmember Johnson, I spent a lot of time at the legislature. Sorry about that. I have two responses to that. One is a lot of those kinds of decisions are made either at the legislature or at the Public Utilities Commission, and so that I would refer back to continuing to participate in those and be as actively involved as you can be. It's a fairly dense place to do business, but it's important. I guess the second thought that I would have is we're recommending also that the city work with Xcel on distribution planning, on infrastructure planning. That right now, infrastructure planning is all done internal to the utility, internal to the engineering departments at the utility. Most of the rest of the utility doesn't know what the plans are. So we have a discussion in the report about taking that and broadening that, making that a public discussion about where the infrastructure is going, what your recommendations for spreading out costs, et cetera. And so that could be, playing at both ends of that conversation, the Public Utilities Commission, where the state conversation about cost allocation goes, and maybe getting more involved in the local planning of the distribution infrastructure, which is what serves residents and businesses in the city, and that's where the smart grid conversations would take place, et cetera. That's another way to take that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Glidden has a question too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this report. I know we've all been anxiously awaiting the final product here. And I just want to note, too, because I know I did get a email comment today from someone asking about, further community engagement on the report and things like that. And I'm sure I'll just say that there are many ways that we can continue to engage around this report. It's very rich. There's a lot in here. There is no way that every single recommendation that's in this report can be pursued at one time. So I think there'll be a lot of opportunity for conversation. But on the other hand, too, this report was produced under really a very tight time frame. And the reason for that was we wanted this opportunity to have valuable information that could assist us in continuing to work around our franchise negotiations, but also thinking more broadly about our climate action plan, our desire as a city for clean energy, but also ways to reduce our carbon footprint. And so I just want to acknowledge that, and that there were some constraints that we put on the timeline for producing this report. And I just think, given all those constraints, it just I really appreciate this, and I find it a very exciting document. A lot of new things in here, so I don't know how that makes you feel exactly. You're kind of on the cusp here. One thing I wanted to just note that's in a recommendation in the report, just because I know that I have heard this from some of my colleagues, and has been part of our discussion in past years, is that there is a recommendation separate from anything we might do about not pursuing municipalization or whatever, but that we would look for a shorter timeline for a franchise term. And so I just think I want to note that that is a significant item. It's one that I think is probably not a surprise, was also a desire of several policymakers who were on the city council last term. And I think for myself, it is something that I would certainly support, this drive for a shorter time frame around the franchise itself. I mean, just one thing that has really struck me is what a changing environment that we are in. A lot of movement at the legislature, a lot of movement just within the energy environment itself. This has been a huge education as we have been looking at our utility partners and our desires as a city on what all is involved, and it is certainly a very changing environment. And to that end, I think having a shorter time frame around the franchise makes sense, and it also seems to comport with other types of agreements around major contracts and other types of franchises that we have within the city enterprise at this time. So I just thought that deserved particular note. There's a lot of interest, I think, in particular around this partnership idea as one that seems to also align with just some very general language that we have exchanged back and forth between ourselves as the city and our utility providers around wanting to find ways to continue to enhance our working relationship together. And I just wanted to kind of make sure that I'm understanding, has there been anything of this sort that has happened before? Or can you tell us a little bit more about how this recommendation came to be?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Glidden, we looked for models for this kind of arrangement and could not find one. So we think this would be the first of its kind in the country. It does seem a relatively pragmatic and simple thing to do, but it's not. This kind of interaction between a city and its utilities generally is much more ad hoc than this. And we did see, as you, I think, referenced, a letter from Dave Sparby from XL, sort of offering to, committing to the city's climate action goals and offering to work with the city in a sustainable energy working group. And we came to our recommendation sort of separate from that, but when we went back to look at that letter, we realized we have formalized, in a sense, or taken a much more formal approach toward what Mr. Sparby had recommended. And so in some cases, in some sense, it's if the city would like to participate or follow this pathway and try to implement this pathway, it would be taking the utilities you'd be asking the utilities to take yes for an answer in a sense. So that's that was our sense of where that it's a new kind of entity, but it's also a very pragmatic approach to this. And one more slide, Mr. Chair, and then I'll turn it over to Jenny. And if this goes to Council Member Cano's question, we think also for the longer term, and what we're thinking is, the 5 to 10 year period, and maybe sooner than that, is that you'd continue to work on community choice aggregation and municipalization so that those pathways were more available to you. Take some of the uncertainty out during this period so that if the near-term recommendations that we're making with regard to enhanced franchise agreements and formation of partnerships, if those don't get you where you think you need to be going with regard to energy, these would be more available to you to implement at the time you make that decision. And so so there's some legislative recommendations there that we wanted to flag for you.
Just to clarify, it's your understanding that we already have legislative agenda items that put us on these paths? Or are you thinking we have to make changes to our legislative agenda?
Mr. Chair, for the pathway for municipalization, continue to support legislation to strike lost revenues. I know that that's a pending pending legislative initiative, and that's part of your package. On the CCA study language, I believe that the advocates, I've been working with advocates to develop language around that, and I'm not privy to your IGR discussions, whether that's currently part of that package.
So maybe we could double check that.
That's correct.
Well, thank you. And now I think we're ready for
And
the
with
next
that,
phase.
Mr. Chair, I turn it over to Jenny, who you'll enjoy much more than you enjoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And my remarks will be very brief, and then we'll open it up for more questions. But what I wanted to touch on is the reason for emphasizing some of these near-term opportunities is that 2025 is not very long away. That's the goal for the city's climate action plan. We believe that there are lots of opportunities in the near term for the city and the utility to work together and leverage respective assets to put together new program opportunities and also enhance existing programs. And so what I'll do is just touch on a couple of those opportunities. From the utility side, there's existing programs, there's technical and financial resources that the utilities can bring to the table. There is data on existing customers. There are incentives at the state level to reach certain goals. And all of these would be brought to the table. On the city side, there's certainly regulatory and oversight roles the city can play. A recent example is the 2013 energy benchmarking ordinance that was passed by this body, which will have large benefits in terms of commercial and public buildings disclosing their energy use. And the city also has existing networks. So to Council Members Glidden's question about engagement, this is where city assets of engaged residents, skilled residents, community networks, action at the local level can be brought to the table to continue to bring these utility resources to be more influential within the city of Minneapolis. So I'll touch on a few of the programs that we reviewed. There's much more detail in our lengthy report. And I will just mention that many of the programs we looked at were developed as part of the Climate Action Plan and the review and prioritization process that the CAC group has done since then. In the commercial sector, this continues to be where a number of the large opportunities are. Commercial buildings use far and away the most energy in the city, both electricity and natural gas. Many of them are very active in reducing their energy use, but we think that there are still continued opportunities to engage this sector. We include public buildings in this category, and again, to the 2013 benchmarking and disclosure ordinance, we learned a large amount about the energy use of public buildings and where the opportunities are. By initiating programs, there are certainly cost-saving benefits for the cities, but there's broader benefits as well. There's health and indoor air quality benefits that public buildings would receive. There's comfort. And if you think about something like the Minneapolis public schools, well, that's a huge advantage to both save energy and increase the quality and comfort of the learning environment. In the residential sector, the Climate Action Plan has very ambitious goals for 75% of homeowners and renters to have access to an energy program by 2025. We believe this is possible, but we believe it will take aggressive and sustained action on the part of the city and the utilities to reach those goals. We want to highlight some near-term opportunities. One important one is developing a rental energy efficiency program. This currently doesn't exist within the city. There has been a lot of interest. There's a lot of potential, especially smaller unit apartment buildings, the 4 to 6 unit buildings that tend to be not forgotten, but not addressed properly by current programs. So with city and utility help, this is an important near-term opportunity. Also just want to highlight this idea of green zones, which is a new idea. It was raised for Minneapolis in the Climate Action Plan, and we think that there's great opportunities to pilot this in the near term. The idea is to take targeted focus on key neighborhoods that are distressed and in need and provide program services to those neighborhoods, potentially targeted funding streams, and also learn more about linkages between energy and poverty. There's a large knowledge gap in terms of what some of the most effective programs might be, and this is an opportunity to learn that for this city in particular. And finally, the city has very ambitious renewable energy goals, and we recommend that some of the best way to address these in the near term is to work with utilities on new state policies that have been put into place where they have to hit certain goals and targets. So, for example, Xcel Energy by 2020 must provide 1.5% of its electricity from solar. Well, this is, if the city can reach its portion of that goal, it would be catapulted into a much more aggressive adoption of solar than currently exists. And if you think about where that would put the city beyond 2020, we think it could hit 5 to 6% of the city's energy use, both rooftop systems, but also with arrangements for residents to purchase solar that isn't necessarily on their rooftop. And I also want to note the question that came up about innovative energy supply arrangements. This is where we assessed that and believe there are opportunities for the city to arrange for dedicated renewable energy supply for its own services.
So let me just ask about that again, because we did see on that the legislative action might, on one of the other slides, if we were going to do this community aggregation, we might need legislation. And because this is something that's come up several times for me when someone has come into my office and they've said, we've got this property, we want to put up a wind farm, we need somebody who can buy the energy, could the city buy it? And it seemed like it was difficult to do that because we needed a side agreement with Xcel, and they'd have to get some revenue to provide that. Or we now hear that there's tribal communities that are very interested in partnering with us because they can put a wind farm for us and they want to know that we'd be a buyer. And I think what I'm learning here today is that if we were able to be a better partner with Xcel, we wouldn't need any changes to state legislation. We could call this an innovative energy supply arrangement. And of course, Xcel would have to be partner to it and be willing to transmit that energy to us, but that would be possible without going back to the legislature. Or those kinds of things might be possible.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I'll look to Mike if I do not answer this correctly. My belief is that an important distinction is the city contracting for supply for its own purposes versus being able to do that on behalf of its residents. And community choice aggregation would be the latter, the city playing that role on behalf of its residents and businesses. And this arrangement would be the city contracting for supply for its own purposes, which is possible. Would you like to add to that?
Just a nuance is that Xcel would be, in this context, could work with you to establish what's referred to often in the energy world as a buy-through arrangement. So they would act as your agent, and they would at least take Public Utilities Commission approval And the question of whether or not there's any, you could explore the boundaries of what the legislative framework allows. But I think there's quite a bit that can be done without legislation in this area. But you might need to go to the commission and get, or together with Excel.
To actually buy it for our residential needs or our commercial needs?
For the, even for the city needs.
Or even just for the city?
Yeah.
Okay, so it would really help probably if Excel and Centerpoint, for that matter, went with the city to the Utilities Commission, or even to help create this. And I'm most interested, I mean, I would certainly say, well, let's do it for our own needs. Let's talk to our other public institutions, for the school's needs, for Met Transit and the light rail, and let's see. But I think we might get to a point where if we did a good enough job, we would even want more than that if we were really going to meet our climate action plan goals or exceed those. And so I'm most interested in a partnership that would be open to exploring some of those alternatives, including the city maybe owning and managing some of its own, if we found a way to do a little hydro, and working in partnership with Excel, or put up our own solar. We had, and was hoping to end this around 2:30, so I don't want to be the guilty one who carried this too far. But I mean, we had a really hard time figuring out how to put solar on the convention center because of who would actually be generating that, and could the city generate it? No, they really couldn't. So we ended up leasing our space for somebody else who owns the panels. And I think there's a big interest in saying, well, couldn't the city somewhere on one of our parking ramps, or many of them, own our own solar and have an arrangement where we could be generating some electricity that would come into the grid and do that. And we do have some now on the Hoff ramp and some other smaller projects. But anyway, I'll let you continue, or maybe another comment, Councilmember Cano.
I just wonder if you, thank you, Mr. Chair. In talking about sort of where energy comes from, and so we're talking about this very notion of consuming the energy, but I'm wondering if any of this work can take into consideration the consumption end of it, in terms of when do we as a society have to start changing our consumption patterns so that we're not continually feeding this frenzy for activity that's just not really sustainable over the long term. And so I'll just give you an example. In Mexico City, my aunt and uncle, they cannot drive their cars every day. There's a certain policy at the city level where folks have to take turns driving their cars, right? And so I don't know if there's any of that sort of addressed in some of these recommendations, or if maybe Councilmember Gordon, I don't know if there's internal discussions about some of that.
Well, I think conservation and efficiency comes up a lot, but maybe you can add a little to that.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair and Councilmember Cano. Yes, we emphasize saving energy as sort of the lowest cost way to meet clean energy goals, certainly. And what this report reflects are a lot of those options. So both in the residential and commercial sector, the city has choices in terms of its own regulatory oversight and how it would like to apply that to some of these issues. And there certainly are opportunities for that we highlight that would help residents meet more aggressive goals, especially in some of the hard to reach sectors where the motivation to save money, while we think of it as a logical motivation, doesn't always put people to the level where we need them to go with these. But certainly those are very important considerations.
Councilmember Fry wants to join the discussion.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. Maybe this is a quicker question, maybe it's a longer one, but I believe it was Mr. Osman that stated that approximately 66% of the total carbon footprint, like the potential reduction would take place in multifamily units. And I'm looking at page 78 here, and it looks like the vast majority of the potential is in areas that have a substantial amount of multifamily units. And I'm just trying to think of what this would look like. I know Excel has the statutory requirement of decreasing their overall carbon footprint by about 1.5% per year, I believe. And they get substantial monies to do that. If those monies would be injected into the multifamily infrastructure, what would that look like? I mean, can the Excel work with a potential developer? Can Excel work with existing building owners? I mean, if we've got the potential, let's act on it. I guess I just don't know how. So.
Yes, Chair and Councilmember Fry, thank you for the question. I'll What I believe you're referring to in Mr. Austin's comments are for the city's carbon inventory, 2/3 of the carbon comes from the buildings and energy sector. So that's compared to the transportation and waste sector. But we do see significant potential in the multifamily sector to help reach that 66% and lower it across the city. One of the things we provide is an inventory, our best assessment given the timing of this study of the relative energy use between single-family homes and multifamily homes. It's harder to reach the multifamily sector because the units are smaller, and you often need to incentivize landlords as opposed to the people who live in the units. And this is one of the reasons why it's been a challenging sector to serve. But recent pilots that the utilities have performed seem to indicate that this is an area, especially with a lot more targeted outreach and potential work by the city to potentially outline certain requirements for rental housing, indicate that this could be a sector with a lot of potential.
So my understanding is that they have this, Excel has this money that's set aside to achieve this goal of 1.5%, and certainly landlords do like money. So to the extent that that money could be, and building owners as well. So you dump that money into, say, having more sustainable windows and collecting rainwater, whatever it is. Is that not possible? What would this look like?
Yep. Chair Gordon and council members. So the goals that the utilities have are to save 1.5% of energy every year. And with that comes substantial budgets to attain those goals. There are restrictions on those budgets and what the money can be spent on. That those decisions are made, again, as Mr. Bull alluded to, at the State Public Utilities Commission and at the State Department of Commerce, who oversee those programs. And we do go into this. It's a little bit of a black hole, but one of the reasons being that the utility ratepayers are what provide that budget, and there are limits on what is considered cost effective for ratepayers to pay. And so that's one of the things that needs to be considered going forward, and I think would be in the details of these programs getting worked out, as how to best leverage the utility money that is available with other resources. Certainly financial incentives are part of it, but there are, again, limitations to how high those can be.
Thank you.
Okay, I think there's about 8 slides left or so.
Very few.
Well,
I will just highlight this again and reference you to the report if you'd like more information, but it does include details. We did an assessment of what the relative, in this case, carbon savings benefits of these different programs would be. And this would be helpful in helping the city and utilities prioritize next steps. And I want to finally just emphasize that we do spend a lot of time discussing energy and carbon savings and renewable energy, but those are just one portion of the city's goals. As we spoke to earlier, certainly equity of energy services is a large priority of the city, maintaining affordability and reliability, and using these programs to generate local economic development, including green jobs workforce and the money that residents and businesses save as they participate in these programs. So briefly, the next steps that we're recommending: first, to renew the city's utility franchise agreements with targeted enhancements and for shorter terms. Simultaneously, to pursue broader clean energy agreements, and these would include the formation of clean energy coordinating partnerships, which would include leadership from the city and utilities. To leverage city and utility assets within these partnerships to develop programs that meet the city's clean energy and sustainability goals. To continue to engage in state energy policy decisions, especially at the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, and use these venues to help improve the city's ability to meet its goals. And finally, to continue to pursue the mid and long-term options of community choice aggregation and municipalization, in as much as there is interest, and use these to increase the city's control over its energy future in the mid to long term, should our near-term recommendations fall short of expectation. And thank you for your time. I'll invite Mike Bull up as well.
Well, thank you all very much, and I want to acknowledge that we have many people in the room who came, I think, to hear about this. We have representatives from Xcel Energy and also from CenterPoint who are here, and I thank you all so much for coming and to hear this information. I think there's a little more discussion that we might want to have, and maybe there's more questions. Councilmember Cano?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, number one, thank you all for being here and presenting the report findings. This is a very, very good, hefty report, and I'm excited to continue to get to know it. But I did want to recognize folks in the room who are with Minneapolis Energy Options and all of the hard work that the organizers and the activists have done to help us vision a new future and to create that. So your work is very much needed with the city. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you all. I know that my office is really busy trying to engage communities of color around this very issue and connect them to the broader conversations that you guys are having. So thank you, because without your hard work and your voice and your courage, we wouldn't have this amazing product here today.
Absolutely, really appreciate that you're here and that you've been involved. I think it's helped. Now, I'll just highlight the action that we actually want to take here, and you can sit down if we have more questions. Welcome you to come up. I really appreciate the recommendations, and I think the idea is that we will continue pursuing those. Some of them we're already working on and looking at, but definitely I'm going to move to receive and file this, but also to direct staff to pursue the recommendations. We're already moving forward with franchise agreement negotiations, but particularly what we haven't been doing much is moving forward to pursue the clean energy agreements, and I want to direct staff to pursue those, and also to pursue all necessary franchise agreements consistent with the Energy Pathways Study recommendations. There's an interesting piece here that this alludes to, which is in the course of these studies, it appeared to the studiers, I guess, and to city group that was looking at this, that maybe there were actually some additional franchise agreements that we ought to look into doing. There's an NRG company that's doing business in downtown Minneapolis, and we don't actually have a franchise agreement with them. They provide some district heating downtown. There is also some questions raised about the University of Minnesota. They have a steam plant. They're also providing energy services to their own campus. They actually might even look a little bit like a municipal utility to some of us, but it's a different kind of organization there. So we want to also direct staff to continue to pursue and to look into those possibilities. And finally, we want to make sure that we're looking at our legislative agenda and see if we have to add some things. I think we talked a little bit like that here, particularly with community aggregation. So that's what I will move forward, is those 3 points that are also in the staff report. Their discussion. Anybody want to express any concerns or excitement and support about any of those items? I don't see any of those, so I'll move those. Oh, yes, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to express excitement, actually, for this. And I think this is a really innovative strategy. And I wanted to thank you and Councilmember Glidden for your leadership last year in taking all of the great work that advocates did and really turning it into something that's really forward-looking. And I think it's really exciting. I also wanted to just voice, I think we all need to take to heart this notion that we need to stay on top of this, and that, it's the city's job here to do the best we can to keep these long-term climate goals in mind, as well as our commitment to our folks that are paying utilities in the city, and to balance those needs. And so, but the longer term piece is harder sometimes to keep on top of and to keep our sights on. And so I just wanted to voice my commitment to making sure that we keep climate change and our city's commitment to global climate change on top of our minds as we go forward with this. So thank you again for your leadership.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll just end, I guess, by another thank you to everybody who's been involved in this. And I think we're really in a good position right now, carving out these middle pathways to see where we might go. I did have an opportunity to call the leadership of the utilities and had some discussion, and I think there is a real willingness and an openness to keep looking into these and move forward with these and see if we can't make something more out of the partnership that they indicated they wanted to engage in. But it's really going to take everybody watching this and everybody pushing everybody to do the best we can. So on the motion as recommended in the report, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. All right, that motion carries. And then I think we're ready to move on to our next item, which people might want to stay for because this is really connected. This is about our climate action plan, which also came at a really critical time in our energy discussions too, and I think really helped feed in and inform this. But you also have my permission if you do need to leave. But this is, I think, very interesting, and I think Mr. Slaughterbeck is going to lead us in a discussion of our next steps for our climate action plan.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Brendan Slaughterbeck. I am the Sustainability Program Coordinator here, and it's my pleasure to present today an update on the prioritization of some of the Climate Action Plan strategies. As has been mentioned before, these two things are very interconnected, so I want to make sure to put that point forward. But just as a reminder, the Climate Action Plan is a document that was adopted by the City Council, but we started this process back in February of 2012 to adopt a plan to understand how we could get to our long-term climate goals. So reducing community emissions 15% by 2015 and 30% by 2025. And to do this, to develop this plan, we engaged in over a year-long process involving many staff members from across the city and many community members, experts, and representatives of other government organizations to do so. And we worked on that plan, and we brought to the City Council last summer a final plan which was adopted in June and incorporated many strategies from a number of sectors to identify how we could turn our emissions pathway towards our goals. This process included experts from a number of areas and recommendations in the areas you see here around buildings and energy, transportation and land use, waste and recycling, and then we also had a working group focused specifically on environmental justice to kind of look at the process as a whole and all the strategies together to provide feedback on, through the implementation of these strategies, how are we addressing disparities in our community. We looked at the final results of that plan to see where is that going to take us, and we think if we actually can meet these very ambitious goals that we set out for ourselves in the plan, that we can hit the city's adopted targets of for 2015 and 2030. And you can see the colored wedges here kind of represent the contribution of the strategies in the particular areas towards meeting those goals. The plan, again, was brought forward last summer. Since adoption, we have been working on a number of fronts. First of all, in June, the City Council, when we brought the plan forward, gave staff direction to look at the many strategies in the report and think specifically about what makes sense in the next 2 years. So in 2014 and 2015, what are the things we should work on right away, right now, to get us started on our work? So we've been working on that prioritization process, which is what brings me here today, and that included work by staff across departments, but it also included getting feedback from our Community Environmental Advisory Commission to develop that final list. Obviously, there's also been strong coordination between the prioritization work that we've been doing and the Energy Pathways Study, which we just heard an update on. We wanted to make sure that the vision that came out of that document was consistent and supportive of the Climate Action Plan goals that were in that document, and also look at really the recommendations of the Pathways Study as an implementation tool for a number of the strategies that are in the Climate Action Plan. And I think Jenny and Mike did a good job of talking about how that might work. Also, since adoption, there have been some things that were ongoing, already going, or that we began work on since the plan adopted that were actually strategies in the plan. So, for example, the Commercial Building Benchmarking and Disclosure Ordinance, which the Council passed, we had results from public buildings in fall of 2013, and staff, sustainability and health staff are now preparing for the first round of private buildings to report, the largest private commercial buildings to report June 1st of 2014. Some other examples, CPED has been working on some new financing tools for energy efficiency called PACE, and Public Works has begun some discussions that I think will be ongoing about bike waste planning, and those are all things that are identified in the plan. To develop the priorities that we brought forward today, the initial step was kind of a staff review and look at those things, and we used a number of criteria to kind of screen those. Obviously, we wanted to coordinate with existing plans and policies, so we wanted to look at our numerous other plans across the city, like the comprehensive plan and others, to understand, make sure that these strategies were coming at a time that worked with those processes. We also wanted to talk to different departments and see how their work plans would jive with some of these strategies. So as much as we'd like to, we want to make sure that other departments are really, in many cases, going to be the key implementers here. So people, particularly in public works, environmental health, and community planning and economic development, really will be some of the champions of these strategies. And so we wanted to make sure that that these priorities for the next 2 years match up with some of their work plans. Obviously, we coordinated with other climate and energy related activities, so the Pathways study. Also, there's a number of ongoing conversations at the Public Utilities Commission that staff is involved in. And then also we wanted to look at some of the other climate action plan implementation goals. So there's a goal, for instance, in the plan to think about what strategies are going to have the most immediate quickest, largest impact. And so we tried to think, what can we do right away that's going to really have a big impact? There are also goals in the plan that look at environmental equity in the city and how can we address that through our implementation of these strategies. So we looked at all those criteria to kind of develop the list. And then we worked with our other departments, as I said, and the Community Environmental Advisory Commission to kind of screen that list. We did make tweaks, additions, subtractions to that list to come up with what you have before you today. So you should have all received what's about a 3-page document, color-coded blue, green, and red. I'm not going to go through all the strategies in that document today, but I did want to provide some highlights for you. It is broken down again into the key areas that are defined in the Climate Action Plan. In the buildings and energy section, there are many strategies related to energy efficiency, renewables in the commercial and residential sections in particular. We've heard a lot from Ms. Edwards about the specific strategies that might be high priority to implement in the next 2 years using some of the tools that we might have through the Pathways recommendations. In transportation and land use, there's a focus on land use planning, transit, and kind of active transportation, meaning biking and walking. I also just wanted to point out a number of the strategies in the plan and in our priorities look towards a significant policy document that the city will soon be tackling, which is an update of the comprehensive plan. And many of the strategies around land use and transportation in particular will find their way into that document, or we hope that they will. So that the preparation of that document, I think, will begin soon, and that's something we need to think carefully about. In waste and recycling, there's a focus on some next steps around commercial recycling ordinance that the city has recently passed, looking at our opportunities to expand recycling in the multifamily sector. But there's also been a lot of developments recently in the waste and recycling field, and so I think I wouldn't be out of place suggesting that there might be a lot of development in the organics recycling area in the near future, and that's highlighted here, but did kind of come after we started this prioritization process, so we weren't aware of all those changes. Just to highlight some next steps on our priorities, again, these strategies, any particular strategy, might be implemented by many different departments across the city. So it won't be me up here speaking every time about all of these, or anybody in the coordinator's office necessarily, but from many city departments. And you might encounter decision points about these strategies in many different committees in different times, and they might not all be talked about as in the Climate Action Plan. just so you're aware of that. Obviously, the Energy Pathways recommendation that you just passed provides a really valuable implementation tool, we believe, for some of these near-term actions, specifically in the buildings and energy section. So as we look to expand energy efficiency opportunities in multifamily buildings, as we look to expand energy efficiency in commercial buildings and renewable energy deployment throughout the city, some of those recommendations and tools and how we move forward with that is going to really be key to implementing some of these. And then we're also suggesting that we're going to track progress through our sustainability indicators, not just on community-wide emissions, but also how are we doing on implementation of these strategies. So maybe a look back at what did get implemented, and then kind of come back each year to do that kind of an update to the council and assess, are we on the right path? Do we need to do more? Do we need to focus our efforts in different places? Before I leave you and answer any questions, I just wanted to give you an update. We started the Climate Action Plan with a set of numbers on what our community emissions were, and those went through 2010. Since we finished the plan, and today we now have 2 more years worth of data. We have 2011 and 2012. 2012, the numbers effectively were within kind of a rounding error of our 2015 goal. This doesn't mean that we're there. Weather has a dramatic impact on any particular year worth of data, and where our electricity mix comes from in any given year has a significant impact on any given year's worth of data. But I think the trend is in the right direction. It has to do with a number of factors, but I think we need to continue our efforts focused on all of these areas: transportation, land use, waste, and energy. And I think we have a very good shot at reaching our goal for 2015, but 2025 is a much more aggressive target. So thank you. I'll stand for any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Glidden has a question or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so one thing I just haven't been completely clear on is I know you had a robust process of working with SEAC, which is important and great, but I'm unclear about what's been the process for working with other departments, because and then we can kind of go through some examples, but I'll just pull one out of a hat. So you have one here that I'll just say I think is really important, which is to help 75% of Minneapolis renters and rental property owners participate in efficiency retrofit programs. Okay, that one. So, but working on this is going to take some robust partnerships with other departments, and seeing also that they would place this at, towards the top of their priority list to have that much of an increase in that program. So what has been the buy-in or the sign-off by other departments in this priority list? Because I just don't want us to have the result of approving a priority list when perhaps the direction should be ensure that other departments or whatever are going to approve, be part of approving this list, because they get some flexibility in setting their priority lists as well, and then of course with oversight, from policymakers. But
sure. Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Glidden. Our approach for looking at these strategies was to take these directly to the departments and have conversations with them about how these intersected with their work plans. That example in particular, I think, is probably a little less formed because, as Ms. Edwards said, some of these programs don't exist yet. The utility rebate programs don't exist yet for that particular item. So we while I think we got good support on these as priorities, some of the work that has to be done isn't quite yet it's not ready to turn into work plan language, for example. But our approach was to go to those departments and discuss the list with them, if that makes sense.
Okay, so what's happened beyond just notifying this is on our list? I mean, because I just, and again,
many
I'm
of
sorry
them-
to press you on this, but I know there can be different interpretations of what that means. So if I was the CPED director, what do you think I would say?
For the CPED related strategies, I think that I'm confident that they would say that these things are things that we are interested or we think are in our work plan for the next 2 years. I think some of these strategies that are in here are, they're not necessarily city programs or plans yet, so they don't, we have some work to do to kind of say, for example, if we want to get 75% of multifamily homeowners through this kind of a program, we need to work with the utilities to develop that program. We need to have some consideration of whether the city wants to do work on regulatory work that might incentivize people to go through those programs. So for some of these have different levels of detail that have already been figured out.
Okay, and I guess I almost would, this is maybe a discussion with the chair, but I'd almost like to see this come back with some of that articulated so we can understand which of these fall into existing programmatic directions that will then involve less work to even figure out how does a program exist and how might we move it forward. And again, as this is a priority list that is, it's still quite long, then that helps direct what needs to happen to champion some of these items and understand what can be the highest benefit particulars in here. So I don't have a staff direction or anything like that prepared, but just as I look at this list, and I think these are exciting. It's an exciting list of priorities, but it's still quite long. It still involves many departments that may not exactly feel this is the number one issue I want to champion. And then, as you said, there may be other intergovernmental relationships that need to be pursued to make some of these a reality. I think we just need to understand some of that to understand how we move these forward. So I might just make that soft suggestion. I can help follow up on that as that might be desired. I'll just mention one more as I'm looking at this, and I'm sorry to be so particular, Mr.
Fine,
Chair.
that's great.
But just because I've been asking about this recently, and you have this in your increasing recycling item about the commercial recycling. And it was Councilmember Gordon who authored that ordinance that I still feel like kind of it's been adopted for now 2 years, 3 years, something in that zone. And I wish this direction actually said review, enforce, and enhance the commercial recycling ordinance, not just enforce it, because I think it needs some review, and it's not just going to be probably about enforcing the existing ordinance, but it may also be about tweaking it to think of how it can be most effective. So some of those things I think might need to happen. And when you make the underlying motion, then I can move that amendment.
Okay. And I think that's a great idea. I think both of those are the good points in terms of the staff direction and what it entails. I think the strategy right now was to direct our sustainability staff to go back and work with the appropriate departments. And then I think the idea was they could even report back to the council committee outside of our committee, so they could take some, if it was a solid waste kind of a goal, for example, if we're talking about commercial recycling, then it's to partner with staff in solid waste and in public works and bring that back through that committee with the reporting. But we could have something come back here first or separate. So it is it's in the recommendation is to work collaboratively with the departments, and I'm happy even talking outside of this meeting and exploring what are the other steps, and maybe we could also get an update, kind of a comprehensive update about what's actually going back to committees and what are the future decision points that make sense. I'll also just comment on the commercial recycling idea. I agree. I think the ordinance could be enhanced and improved. I think what we opened with was a pretty soft ask of our businesses, is just to provide the services there within their facility. But a lot of times when we'll go around businesses and where we work, we don't see any opportunity to actually recycle as a user of that business or as an employee, because we didn't require all of that. We required the back end be provided, so that those people who wanted to participate could do it, and everybody went along with that, and now supposedly they all have recycling services to their buildings, picking them up. So now we need to come in and say, let's make sure they're doing that, but then maybe there's ways we can actually require a little more. I think we also required a minimal educational program, a flyer in the break room or something really minimal. So we could definitely tweak that, and we could put that in here. The motions that we have to consider around this are 4. There's actually another one that I'm bringing in. So one is to receive and file this. The second is to direct sustainability staff to work collaboratively with other departments, including but not limited to public works, community planning and economic development, health, and neighborhood and community relations, to implement the priorities and report back to appropriate council committees on progress and with future decision points. The third is another staff direction, directing staff to report annually on progress towards emissions reduction goals and implementation of prioritized strategies. The fourth staff action, which is a third staff direction you should have before you right now, and this is directing staff to work with the Community Environmental Advisory Commission to develop a long-term carbon emissions reduction goal. This would be to supplement our city's short and midterm goals of 15% by 2015 and 30% by 2025 from the 2006 baseline, and report back with a recommendation to our committee no later than April 14, 2014. And this is not part of the staff direction, but just to add some support to that, the state already has a much more aggressive goal set, and many other people have, in the sense is this is something that's been missing for us. I also think it's something especially important as we're moving forward in these partnerships with our utilities. What is our long-term goal? Where do we want to go? We're already seeing that our 2015 goal, just because of a slumped economy or extra warm winters, although it's probably going to all change after this one, but has already got us there. And so I think it's important that we come up with a longer term goal. It'll probably be in the ballpark of 80%, because I think that's what the state has set. But anyway, that's the staff direction I want to put on there. We can amend those staff directions now if we want, or work on other points later. Any discussion on those? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure that I have any amendment here, but I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that there may be things within here that you may need policy support for, to direct our agencies to more aggressively meet some of these goals than may happen without policymaker intervention. And so I just, I think maybe from my perspective, and I'm interested to hear what anyone else has to say about this. One thing that might be helpful is to kind of identify which things are already happening within our agencies, and then more kind of clearly highlight the things that you may need policy direction on in order to make them happen more quickly or in a way that better meets our climate goals. So thanks.
I think that's a great idea, but that's not a staff direction that you want us to vote on necessarily. It's a suggestion.
I guess I was just speaking to B within the motion, the staff direction motion. I think that's kind of understood within the existing text, but I just wanted to highlight that that there may be things that, when working with the other departments, may kind of rise to the top as things that need policy direction.
I appreciate that, and I actually think there'll be some things in here that committee members right here will plan on championing, and they'll want to lead on, and they'll want to move forward on. There's some things that I think we're going to move faster on than we wanted to. I think that thanks to the county and some other work, I think we're going to see our curbside composting coming more aggressively than maybe we expected. I kind of looked through the list and wanted to make sure some of my favorite things were on here as made it through as a priority, and I'm delighted that they have. I think some of them did because the comp plan's going to get updated and they're going to start now, so I'm especially curious about the complete neighborhoods and what does that really mean and how can we define that and that. So I appreciate that. I'm sure there'll be interest in hearing back and hearing more. Councilmember Glidden, did you have another comment? I see no other comments then on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, hold everything.
I'm sorry, but I just wanted.
All right, let's just move to reconsider. So tell us what you would like us to add into the motion. This is, and I'll put it in
For
there.
increasing recycling, you see it as item number 4, to modify the just beginning phrase to say, instead of enforce the commercial recycling ordinance, that it would say review, enforce, and enhance the commercial recycling ordinance.
Okay, so then we're also slightly changing the matrix. Interestingly enough, I think we're reaching back in and we're actually tweaking the recommendations of the plan, and I think that's just fine. But that's with that, let's now vote on the staff directions, the receiving and file, and now the adding the language to that one strategy. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion carries. Thank you very much. And we have one more discussion item, also pretty interesting, and I think we're right on track and right on schedule. Thank you so much, Mr. Sloterdijk. This item is item 7 on our agenda, and it's the compost rules and rule changes. Everybody should have already received, just for your reference, somewhere in your pile there, a substitute motion on the proposed comments. But first we'll get a brief staff report from Mr. Herbert Holtz and Ms. Kish. Welcome very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, my name is Dave Herbert Holtz, and I'm the Director of Solid Waste and Recycling for the city. Kelly Kish is currently loading a PowerPoint that she's going to briefly present. I just want to state that with this item, that Public Works Department and Solid Waste and Recycling Division assisted in the drafting of the prepared comments. However, the substitute comments have added support and adoption of comments made by the Minnesota Composting Council. Public Works supports the efforts of the Minnesota Composting Council, but we're concerned about our ability to defend the Minnesota Composting Council comments because we have not conducted critical examination of the technical information that's included in their comments. Public Works does support modifying the Minnesota pollution control compost rules to make it easier for organics processors to develop and operate successfully, and that sound technical measure and reasoning be used in the creation of any new rules. The Public Works solid waste recycling goal is to provide the most efficient, economical, and environmentally secure organics management program for the residents of Minneapolis. So at this time, I'll have Kelly Kish provide, I think it's important to provide a little overview on the state composting rules.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Welcome.
Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you for having me here today. Are these good? Can you hear me? All right.
Is this your first time presenting to a committee?
It is.
Yeah, well, welcome aboard.
All
Glad to
sorts
have
of
you at the
firsts coming
city.
up for me here.
Yeah, and I know we look pretty scary up here, but just go ahead and be yourself.
All right. All right. So we're going to go into why the PCA first started out with this compost rule revision process. As you may or may not have known, that they have done some waste characterization studies in the past, with the most recent one being in 2013, where they go through the garbage and they actually determine what Minnesotans are still putting in the garbage. For 2013, the results of that were actually that the organic matter, food waste, yard waste, and other yard debris were 31% of our total garbage generated. If you pull in the non-recyclable paper and the compostable plastics portion of that, it's closer to 40% of what we throw away. So although this process started a long time ago, there is still constant reiteration as to why we need to do what these rules are hoping to do, and that's move that organic material higher up the food chain from landfilling or incinerating, as we're currently doing in most portions of the state and with most of Minneapolis's organics currently. So that was one of the main strategy or main reasonings behind it. The other was to provide environmental protection while making it less costly to manage these materials that are less hazardous than municipal solid waste. The third was to, as I just said, provide environmental protections while making it easier for more of these sites to come on board. So as I have already stated, that this process has taken a long time. It started in July of 2010. There's been numerous stakeholder meetings, numerous rounds of draft comments, and now finally in January of this year we have a public noticed rule that still leaves a little to be desired for many of the composters that may come on board, and I will go into the areas where Minneapolis, for the community gardeners and the backyard composters, would be affected by some of these proposed changes. So the current rules as they are today, we have a backyard compost site which is exempt from any agency regulation. We have a yard waste site which is a permit by rule facility, meaning they fill out a piece of paper that says I'm composting yard waste at this location. Send that to the agency approves it, and they submit an annual report saying how much material they collected and how much finished compost they produced. That's all they have to do. There's very little siting requirements to a yard waste site. The third is it's a solid waste compost permit for a municipal solid waste composting facility, and that is currently what you need to compost mixed yard waste and food waste in Minnesota. So what the proposed rules do is they put some changes to they get rid of the backyard compost site as a tier, and they move it into a category called a small compost site. I'll go over that a little bit more in just a moment here. There's no changes to our yard waste or our MSW tiers, and they're adding a brand new tier called a source separated organics composting facility. All right, so our impacts of what has changed from current rules to our proposed rule. The backyard composting site definition has been completely removed, encompassed by that small compost site. One of the other comments that is here for approval by this committee is to add language into the proposed rule that will allow local units of governments to add additional acceptable materials by ordinance. This is particularly important for the people here who have chickens and compost their chicken litter on site. Under the proposed rule, they would not be able to continue that process without changing or adding in some additional language of this nature. So with those things being said, this is the definition that was removed from the current rule to the proposed rule, and up to where we have the additional materials may be deemed acceptable by the local unit of government by ordinance, and these sites are exempt from agency regulation. Everything else on there above that is what has been in place for the past 20 years for backyard sites. Now we move on to our small compost sites. This tier, again, the one that encompassed the backyard site, was made to make it easier for colleges, community gardeners, and some smaller but still larger composters to do what they have been doing with less regulation from the agency. This rule says that any fats, oils, grease, meats, dairies, and what am I missing? Animal manures cannot be accepted on site at all, whereas people who do this type of composting know that that is not feasible. If you're taking food waste, if you're taking yard waste, in your food waste, you're getting some fats, oils, meats, grease, and dairy. And in your yard waste, you're likely getting manures from all sorts of urban and or rural animals that may be in the yard waste. The other thing about this small site is that it increases the limit to an 80 cubic yard volume. So right now, because Minneapolis has a backyard compost site ordinance in place, we wouldn't see one at 80 cubic yards, but elsewhere, that's quite a large amount of material for them to consider and include in the backyard site. So our comment for the small compost site definition is to put it in the actual language of the rule that incidental amounts of fats, grease, oils, meat, dairy, and animal manures are accepted. And then again, add in that additional materials may be added by a local unit of government by ordinance. The third thing that this comment requests is in that 80 cubic yards on site to only calculate in the collected raw materials, or I'm sorry, to not count in the collected raw materials or the finished compost as part of that 80 cubic yard volume. Our third comment is, as these rules are currently written, the proposed rule does regulate both of these types of sites. So our recommendation is to again, put that backyard site definition in and leave it exempt. These other sites, these requirements aren't anything too out of the ordinary for any permitted facility in the state, and this would leave the agency able to regulate them if needed. However, they have stated many times that they have no intention of regulating the small or the backyard size composting facilities. Other issues that would affect the community gardeners in the city is that for windrowed composting unaerated, they have a requirement of 12 inches of porous material to be placed at the bottom of that pile. This is, for small and large sites, very cost prohibitive for the community gardeners. Where are they going to get the carbon stock or the most likely wood chips needed or ground tires? How are they going to pay for someone to be able to grind those materials and get them on site? And how are they going to be able to manage those piles with keeping that 12 inches of material intact? The other issue with this is the turning requirements for the piles. Right now, the wording is to turn them every 3 to 5 days, and what the comment will be in just a second here is just to make that language consistent with US EPA standards of a minimum of 5 turns within the 15-day PFRP, that's the process to further reduce pathogens process. And that process is essentially meaning that your pile has maintained a high enough temperature for a long enough time that anything that's going to harm the environment or humans has been killed. So here is that comment number 4, which is pulling out the section relating to that 12 inches of material and then changing the wording around again to be consistent with the US EPA guidelines. And last but not least, it is known in the industry that these rules will be contested. For there to be any major changes to these rules, they need to be contested. So we are requesting that the council acknowledges the fact, or the committee, I'm sorry, that contesting the rule will delay us by 3 months, maybe a little longer. But when the last time we had an opportunity for changes to this rule happen was almost 20 years ago, if we don't work to contest this case now and get some of these wrongs righted, we could be waiting another 20 plus years to have any modifications to this chapter. And that is the quick overview of the comments.
So in the substitute, I think there's another subtle change that was made. So if you could go back to the slide about the 80 cubic yards and whether it's included and what's not included or included. Yep. I think it's comment 2 or what I have in C says that it does not exceed 100 cubic yards on site at any time, including collected raw materials and compost being processed, but excluding carbon materials and finished compost. Does that make any sense? Do you have a copy of that?
I think that's in between many different layers going back and forth.
Probably, and I think that was catching the essence of the same thing, and there were just concerns about it. Doesn't that do the same thing that this was doing, or do you have any comments on that change?
Well, I don't know about what has been discussed in terms of potential future ordinance changes to allow for some other larger sites. If that is the thought and the hope from this committee and the council as a whole, then it would be a good idea to change that 80 cubic yards to 100. That is what the Minnesota Composting Council and many others will be commenting, is that 80 should be raised to 100.
Okay, so I appreciate that, and that's kind of what was the hope, to align that and make it more consistent. This also could impact a lot of uses even nearby the city, where we could get some smaller businesses willing to take our compost, and that was the desire. And I will speak a little bit to the last difference then, is that I'm also moving that we support the recommendations of the Minnesota Composting Council. Ms. Kish actually served on that, and Ginny Black chaired that, and she's from the MPCA. And that my sense was during these discussions that somehow the voice of the Composting Council was being drowned out by the Solid Waste Management Group, because I think what we really wanted to do was find a middle ground where that maybe it was more requirements than the yard waste is right now, but wasn't quite as high as the requirements that they want in their final plan. In fact, some of the earlier drafts made it much more feasible for more people to start their composting business. I know that this has been a problem, though, because we didn't actually get the final comments until Friday. I have them here that people can review, and I've reviewed them. They're not that different from earlier comments. So I would like to move the substitute. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, on that motion, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Abstentions? That motion carries. And I think we've managed to finish our business before Councilmember Glidden had to leave. So I'm going to I do have one announcement that I did want to make, though, before everybody leaves. And you may recall we discussed as a committee, and you can sit down if you want, having some community meetings with the Neighborhood Community Engagement Commission, and we have decided to do that, and we have actually set dates and times for those. So these would be community meetings where our committee will go out there, and they'll be noticed on the council calendar. And I just wanted to announce them here while our committee is still meeting. The first one's going to be held March 8th at Walker United Methodist Church at 3104 16th Avenue South. March 18th, that is, at 7 p.m. And the other one will take place April 14th at the Capri Theater, 2027 West Broadway Avenue, 7 to 9:30. The plan is to focus on what is community engagement, what's the future of community engagement in the city of Minneapolis. We want to have a time to listen, take most of the meeting to listen to comments from the community about that. And I think we'll also end the meeting with some time for community conversation where people can break up and discuss things in smaller groups, and we'll also capture those comments. The sense is this is a good time to look at what community engagement is going to look like after NRP's been gone for a couple years and we've had our new system up and running, and this will give us a chance to hear from the community and see what they think. And I'll just note that first meeting actually falls during the comment period on our city goals, so we may have an opportunity to hear back from people on what are our goals for how we work in the city and how we engage the community. So with that announcement, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.